I learned something about myself. And that's what I want the take-home point from this to be, and that is I am prejudiced. I am strongly prejudiced, and that affects my ability to work with every single grower, every single person in the industry, and every single consultant in the room, Danny. My prejudice is very strong, and I am prejudiced by what I know. I'm prejudiced by what I know. My students in the room, Katrina, Clarence, some of the other students, I always use this model when I'm talking. When I teach them, if you're in an upstairs room one day and you hear the clip-clop, clip-clop, clip-clop of hooves go by, I teach my students, don't think it's a zebra. You know, what are the chances of a zebra? It's more likely a donkey or a horse or a mule. Don't think about zebras. This is my philosophy. And this is why it's so important for 2017. And my relationship as I go on further is my career with you all. Because sometimes there's a zebra out there, okay? And we need to be aware of that. In this model that they call heuristic, this mental shortcut that I go through, the mental shortcut when I go through, when I get a call from a county agent, Scott, asking me what's going on, my mental shortcut already assumes a lot of things about what likely happened, okay? And what that does, if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. The problem is that I've been taught, and I'm teaching my students to look at the ordinary. Why? Because the ordinary is most likely what we're going to see. The problem is when we look at a year like 2017, where I know what white mold looks like, and I know what leaf spot looks like, and I go to the field anticipating what it is and trying to prove myself that it's something that I probably already knew. Looking back, as Mark said, you know, if this conversation is about a bad year, we didn't have a bad year. What was this? It was the third highest yields on record. I mean, I struggle with the same thing you did, Mark, is what am I going to talk about? And what am I going to say? But then something critically important came up, because the fact is that I have to recognize, I recognized in this that not everybody had a good year. And just to the south, Danny Colvin, there were some areas in Florida who had catastrophic, their term, not mine, catastrophic collapses, okay? When I go to the field, I generally look for the obvious. If I get a call from Scott Carlson or Ty Torrance asking me to come to the field and a peanut field, I have already gone through in my mind rehearsing for what I'm looking for. I'm looking for specific symptoms that I'm familiar with. Why? Because 99.9% of the time we can go out in the field and we look for these things. So for any growers or consultants or agents in the room, this is my laundry list. This is what I'm looking for, and I'm also looking for, just like Eric Proskauer will tell you, 9 times out of 10, I've made that number up, Eric, but anyway, you go out there, it's probably nematodes, could be nematodes when people think it's herbicide. Why does everybody think it's herbicide? Why don't they think nematodes? Or it could be seedling disease, right? This is my laundry list. And then I try and tick each one off and say it's not aspergillus, it's not white mold, it's not leaf spot, it's not Diplodia cholera, it must be valor injury, right? So I go through there and do that. And the problem is, and I recognize this, that when I'm talking to growers, when I'm talking to agents, consultants, is, am I actually diagnosing or I'm looking for a blame? And it's very easy for me to go through and say, well, I'm just diagnosing the problem. What was your rotation? What was your planting date? What variety did you plant? You can read that as well as what program did you use? When was your last application? Obviously, you got this problem because you quit spraying too early, okay? All of this can be defended as a diagnostic approach that I use with every single one of you in every field visit I've ever been on. But what's the problem with it? The problem is I'm looking for what you did wrong, okay? Not meaning to be prejudiced against you, but I'm assuming the only reason that I've been called is there's the potential for a disease or nematode problem. And what's that mean? We have it because you didn't spray the right product. You went on a 21-day interval when we told you to go on a 12-day interval, okay? You sprayed tebuconazole at 21 ounces per acre because it was cheap and we wished you'd use something else, okay? So I'm prejudiced in that way in looking at these. But these are the questions. Now, in my defense, these are all critically important components. If you're not doing these things, we have to look at them. The problem is that things do go wrong. And my approach does work. Here's a slide in my defense. Here is a slide where things went wrong, and we can explain, this was 2017, things went wrong, and the grower, when you point them out to them, they acknowledge that that's why they went wrong. The picture you see there is in Terrell County. The grower was on a short rotation. He knew that he'd had CBR in the past. He had not seen CBR in many years, and it came back this year. Likely weather-related, but more so than that, short peanut rotations. Why? Because that's the crop that can make him the most money. And it's not rocket science. You have a problem with a soil-borne disease, you don't rotate, and sooner or later it's going to come back to haunt you. And we could explain this. Peanut planted in fields overwhelmed, tied with root knot nematodes. Okay? If you've got so many root knot that it's catastrophic and you don't plant a resistant variety and you're not putting telone out there, it doesn't matter what you put out, you cannot fix the problem as well as you would like to. Okay? Our system and approach works there. We saw a lot of Diplodia collar rot last year. A lot of growers mistook that for white mold or limb rot, but Diplodia collar rot is in association with tomato spotted wilt virus. It's in association, and if you don't take the steps to manage tomato spotted wilt virus, you will have Diplodia collar rot. You will. Okay? So in this case, our approach, what is it? What went wrong? You should have rotated longer. You should have planted a resistant variety. You should have managed tomato spotted wilt virus. It works. That's where it works, but some places it doesn't. Danny Colvin and I were talking earlier about this collapse in Florida. Okay? Obviously it didn't happen in Georgia on such a scale because we made our third highest yields. But in Florida, stretching from Levy County to Suwannee County, Columbia County, all the way up to Mariana, there were thoughts by some growers, if we have to go through this again, we will not be able to grow peanuts. And the problem with it is not that people weren't asking questions, the county agents were asking questions, specialists were asking questions. The problem was that if you showed any one of us, it's like the idea, have you ever seen it where 5 blind men have their hand on a different part of an elephant, and you ask them, what does an elephant look like? And depending upon where your hand is, you describe it. If you look at that picture, which is consistent with what they saw, people want to say, Glenn, they want to say potassium problems. If you showed me the stunted wilting plant, I said that's clearly root knot nematode or tomato spotted wilt virus. And it went on like that. Depending upon what you look, the foliar symptoms, the late season yellowing and collapse, that's late season tomato spotted wilt virus. And so I tried to convince myself, I did convince myself that everything was related to disease problems that they weren't managing, or soil pH, etc., etc. Okay? The problem is the bottom. Nothing obvious explained everything. And we still don't know what happened in Florida, but the big learning point, I think, for all of us from the Southeast who looked at it, continue to look at it, is that sometimes we cannot explain a significant problem. You would think with all of our experience, we could tell those farmers in Florida what went wrong. And Danny, we can't tell you right now. We cannot tell you. All we can tell you is it wasn't all spotted wilt, it wasn't all nematodes, it wasn't all soil pH, but there may have been some indication. And we continue to look at that. I can tell you the one thing it wasn't, though, okay? You can write this down. You can write this down. If anybody asks you what happened in Florida, you say, I don't know, but I know what it wasn't. Hurricane Irma did not suck the Gulf of Mexico up and rain it down on those peanuts. Okay? I'm just telling you, that's not what it was. And if anybody tells you it was, you can have them see me. I'll tell them the truth. What about Georgia? By the way, people want to believe that. That did not happen. Okay? What about Georgia? We did not have the same catastrophic effect they did. But what we had in Georgia last year was the 3rd highest yielding peanuts we've ever had in the state, a huge acreage, and we had good growers whose yields were off. Okay? And going out in those fields, whether it was Scott Carlson or Jeremy Kickler or with Philip Edwards, I went out anticipating what they had done wrong. And my job was to figure it out. This indication in Tift County, yields were off by probably a couple thousand pounds. Yes, there was white mold in the field. Yes, there was Diplodia collar rot in the field, but that did not explain the number of pods that were left in the soil. It did not explain what I was seeing with my own eyes. And so what's the obvious reason? They didn't control leaf spot and they harvested too late. But they did control leaf spot. And they harvested on time according to our peanut maturity clinics. Okay? We cannot explain what happened in that field based upon what I already knew. And that puts me in an uncomfortable position. What I already knew or thought I knew didn't explain the problem. Webster County. I was with this group of growers at least 3 times. And what they described was exactly what the Corsies described in Tift County. We stayed on time. We managed our white mold. We managed our leaf spot. We harvested on time. There is no way. Did I believe them? No. I went up there anticipating that they thought there was no way, but that I could show them there was a way. And you know what? There was no way. They controlled the disease. They controlled their maturity. They harvested on time, and they feel in some situations, again, they lost a couple thousand pounds. And based upon the peanuts that I saw left in the ground, I can't disagree with them. And based upon my experience, there's nothing I could describe going into. I could not walk away from that field and tell them what it was. Again, this is where some of the smoking gun came, but this was in Tift County again. A grower who had expected to make 7,000 pounds and didn't. Okay? Well, we can't always make what we want, right? But this grower did everything that he possibly could. We can't control weather, Scott, but he did everything he possibly could. A premium variety, a premium production package, rotation, management of the crop, a premium fungicide program. I could not find the first disease in the field. And again, it's tempting, it's easy. I have done it in the past to walk away from that, scratch my head and say, I hope we don't see that again. Nothing's more unfair to the grower to say, I hope we don't see that again, but I don't know what it is. All right, so what do we know? This is from some work. This is just an observation I had. This is off of Rome Etheridge's blog when he was a county agent in Seminole County. Okay? He and I went to there was no county agent at the time in Decatur County. Nothing new about that, right? But we went to Decatur County and looked, and this was what he wrote in his blog. And if you haven't recognized those symptoms, that is lesion nematode. And basically his quote from me is, lesion nematodes generally are a non-issue in peanuts, and they cause a cosmetic issue. The only time I would be concerned is if you were growing boiling peanuts or ballpark peanuts. Otherwise, they don't matter. But what we found in that field was, every single time in that field, heavy lesion nematode, and the diagnostic symptom was not just the speckled pods, it was the weakened stems. If you look back on every field that we worked in, where the growers described, we managed the crop for this amount and we received 1,000 to 2,000 pounds less, every single one, when Patty Temper with USDA, Dr. Patty Temper tested them, what was busting out of those pegs? Lesion nematodes. Lesion nematodes. The second thing we found, whether it was in Turner County or in Irwin County or Colquitt County or Tift County, is when we looked at what was growing out of those pegs, this black fungus that we were not familiar with was there. Okay? My comfort zone said I have no idea what it was. But when we looked further, when we involved the USDA, the lesion nematodes came out. When we started looking at what otherwise looked like healthy pegs, this fungus came out. Okay? The big takeaway I have from 2018 is whatever happened in Florida did not happen on the same scale, but something happened in Florida and we need to understand what it was. Glenn talked about the potassium symptoms we've seen. Scott talked about, we saw something like that, but on the scale. What we need to understand it, not just for them, but more for us. Second thing is, in these fields where you had premium and strong management programs, two things we weren't expecting were associated with them, and that was this black fungus that we're studying and also the lesion nematode. Okay? So, the most important thing to wrap up with, what are the questions for 2018? When we talk to these growers who insist that they lost 1,000 or 2,000 pounds per acre, what we could have dismissed as, or I could have dismissed as, I hope we don't see that again, but I don't know what it is. Are we seeing something new? That's the first question you should ask. Are we seeing something new? I think that we're seeing something new, if nothing less than, as our yield expectations reach 7,000 pounds and beyond, what in the past, whether it's lesion nematode or Schleptosphaeria lina fungus, they may be creating a greater problem simply because our expectations increase. What was a minor problem before now may become a major problem in maintaining yields. We may be able to maintain 4,000 to 5,000 pound yields consistently without managing those pests, but Scott, to get to 7,000 pounds they may be. Do we have the needed tools? That's another question. Again, I'm not saying that black fungus and I'm not saying lesion nematode was responsible for everything, but it was associated with the growers who explained to me they had a problem. The question now is, do we have the right tools to fix it? We have nematicides. Lesion nematode is no different. It's a plant parasitic nematode. Do we have the tools that we can use to manage it? And the answer is, I don't know. We have tools that kill nematodes. But do we have the production practices in place? Do we have the timing to test it? But I can assure you, looking ahead to 2018, the questions we're going to answer is, what about the lesion nematode? What about the black? And so, what I want to leave you with is this. If we're worried about lesion nematodes, we should be. If we're worried about this black fungus, we should be. Not panic, but worried. What's the impact? How do we control it? Is it going to impact my farm? But the most important thing we can do is do what we already know to do. Crop rotation, the variety selection, the good fungicide programs. That takes out most of what we do. And how do I know that? If you do what you're supposed to do, we make 4,300 pounds a year on a state average. If you do what we're supposed to do, you wind up with near record yields. But we don't want to just do that. We want to do something new. Philip Roberts, I'll finish up with Philip Roberts, our extension entomologist quote. He says, if you always do what you've always done, you always get what you've always got. Okay? We don't want to always get what we've always got. So that's why we're looking ahead, UGA extension and research to make a difference. Okay? I appreciate your time.